You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Here for the Truth podcast. I'm Joel Rafidi. I got my co-host Yerasimos in the house as always. This is episode 89, and we have the incredible Brian Sanders in the house. You may know him on social media as Food Lies. He's producing a 6-part feature-length documentary called Food Lies as well, and we go deep. We cover a lot, and this is a very valuable, knowledge based podcast all around food. Before we get into that, we have recently launched our brand new private membership community called Friends of the Truth. This is for our podcast listeners that want to get a little bit deeper, um, don't really want to invest in the full length 8-week course that is Rise Above the Herd. So, what this is basically an opportunity for you to enter our world, to receive monthly live teachings from us, to receive monthly guest expert calls with some of the podcast guests that you've become familiar with. You get the chance to submit questions and to interact with them live as well. We're adding a whole bunch of resources. Most importantly, what you get is community, like minded community, people who share your values, are on the same page as you, are on similar journeys to you. And it's something that we're really, really excited about. We currently have an offer where you can get 50% off your first month subscription. So we've jam packed this with value for a pretty affordable cost. If that's something that interests you, please head to friendsofthetruth.co to discover more about that. And we really hope to see you inside our container and to connect with you. Without further ado, this is Here for the Truth. Our website's hereforthetruth.com. All our episodes are available there. Thank you for listening. Please like, review, rate, subscribe wherever you are, and enjoy this episode. All right, everybody. Brian Sanders is in the house. He's the filmmaker behind the feature-length documentary Food Lies and host of the Peak Human podcast. He graduated from UCLA with a degree in mechanical engineering and then turned to technology and sold an app company. He's used his technical background and love for fitness and nutrition to also work as a health coach and be the co-founder of the health media and technology company Sapien. He's also a speaker and the owner of nosetotale.org, providing premium grass-finished meat to the 48 contiguous states. Brian, welcome to Here for the Truth.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure, brother. One way we always like to kick this one off, I really just want to get into the major rites of passage that you experienced in your journey. What were the key turning points that allowed you to shift from, I guess, where you were to what you now embody?
I never thought I'd end up here. I was a mechanical engineer. I was just kind of doing my thing, going about my life and kind of looking like everyone else. And that wasn't good because I hit 30
Yeah.
and I was kind of getting the dad bod.
Mm.
And I just had all these problems. I had acid reflux. I had joint pain. I had like overuse injuries from the computer. I had allergies. I just had just sort of like, yeah, I thought I was not going to be able to play sports as much. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, you just turned 30 and then you can't play sports anymore. And then you just call it a life and you drink beer and watch football. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to play football. I was still playing flag football, competitive flag football into my 30s because I switched my diet, I switched my lifestyle. And then there's also the sad part of the story, the big turning point for me. It's around the same time, lost both of my parents. So this was around 30. And so very young to lose both your parents. It
Yeah.
was cancer and Alzheimer's. And they they were a little older than normal parents, but not much. They just had these chronic diseases that no one really recognized or warned them about. And I think they're very much tied to the diet and lifestyle. Some people don't really understand that cancer and Alzheimer's are very much diet and lifestyle related. Some people think, oh, well, it's just obesity and type 2 diabetes. That's very obviously what you eat. And then everything else is genetic. Like, no, not at all. Not at all. And I visited other cultures that don't get these things at all. We can talk about later as I went to Africa and found people in their, there's a lady over 100 jumping around, dancing. This is how humans can live. This is what I think our ancestors were able to do. And I saw that firsthand in Africa. And that's kind of the opposite of what's happening with normal people in the US and other in westernized countries is they expect to have a dad bod. They expect to be on multiple medications. They expect to have all these
Mm.
little problems, and then they just get worse and worse, and then they end up in a nursing home, or it's just this terrible slide downhill. And that was kind of happening to my parents. Looking back, I realize now that they both had pre-diabetes and didn't know it. And I'm here making the film, digging up all these statistics. The CDC admits that 9 out of 10 people who have prediabetes don't know it. Okay, so this is crazy. We have this medical system, especially in the US, that spends more than any other country, and we can't even recognize disease. Like,
Mm.
these doctors don't recognize prediabetes, and even the big government agencies admit it. 9 out of 10 people don't even know it. So they're walking around with elevated glucose, like all these signs of problems, and we just don't even do anything about it, or we don't even recognize it. So that set me off on my path to start creating the Food Lies film, which is 5 years ago, over 5 years ago, actually. I went full time in that. And uh, everything else has kind of come from that. And we can dive into some more of the details. But I guess I'll also say that the changes for me personally, I listed some of these ailments I had, plus, just being like 20 pounds overweight, of just being sort of round. I was never, obese or anything. I made some few dietary changes, just little bits, little changes, lost the 20 pounds of fat, completely changed my body composition, didn't have allergies anymore, didn't have the joint pain, my chronic overuse conditions went away, and I've never had acid reflux since. And all I did was just change what I ate, and it's amazing. And so I wanted to tell the world. So many people have done this that I know around me, and I've seen great results. And then I started doing the podcast, started doing social medias while I made this film, and now there's I don't know how many millions of people around the world doing this and feeling great.
Yeah, it's amazing like what happens when you make a simple change like that. And even it goes beyond just changing the food you eat, but and I've talked about this before in previous podcasts, but the type of person, the psychology of a person that decides to make that change, and how they shift their mindset and how that impacts your health as well. And I want to get into, you've probably seen the memes and the pictures being thrown around social media of like beaches from like the 1970s
Hmm.
or the 1960s where everyone looks fit. Everyone like looks somewhat healthy. And yet here we are 50, 60 years later, and it's close to the opposite of that. Where wherever you go, whatever town you go to, you see like super dad bods, and you see people that are obese and overweight, and you see children that are unhealthy. So like, what do you think are the main contributing factors to that?
It's a deep rabbit hole, and that's what I think about the most. Actually, I always am just like, what changed? And I think there's this idea that the eat less, move more, this like
Mhm.
sort of like calorie balance paradigm. I think that's like the stupidest argument of what changed. So if you look at the statistics of obesity and disease, it was kind of just like going along, rising a little bit. And then it hit 1980 and it ramped up like crazy. And so I'm always like, hey, do you think people at 1980 just decided to just be a slob? Everyone at once, just like, we're gonna be a slob. We're not gonna count calories anymore. We're gonna not eat less and move more. We're gonna do the opposite. And then it just all happened at once. Doesn't make any sense. I think what happened, the biggest change is there was a huge dietary shift. And I do really appreciate what you say about it's a mindset. And there's so many things that happen when you decide to be healthy and you change your lifestyle, you change your thoughts, you change your intentions. And that has something to do with it. But I think the biggest factor is just really what you eat. What you eat, that's like what interacts with your body the most. You know what I mean? Like if you think about, I think there's all these other factors like the quality of the air you breathe and the quality
Mhm.
of the water you drink and all that stuff. But really, the food is like touching your body. You know what I mean? It goes through your body. Your food is
Mm.
made, your body's made up of food that you eat, right? I mean, it's obviously transformed in your body, but that's what matters most. 1980s when the dietary guidelines got introduced, and really in a big way, the food changed. And it changed to basically highly just more processed foods. Like people remember the food pyramid. the bottom is like 6 to 11 servings of grains. And there's a whole backstory of how we even got that. But really, when you look at that shift, it basically shifts the entire diet of the nation and, exporting that to the around the world to more empty calories, more nutrient poor foods, right? Like you can say there's all these problems with grains. You could talk about gluten, you could talk about glyphosate, and how we grow these crops and all these problems. But one of the simplest problems is they're not nutrient rich. If you eat like I think for all most of history, we're eating whole foods mainly. It's all we had, right? And then up until 1980, people were still eating whole foods. You see the people on the beaches, 1970, that's when you would eat like a roast for dinner. You get a big beef roast for dinner. You had some vegetables, you had some potatoes. You're eating eggs and bacon for breakfast. You could, you were eating a good diet, nutrient dense diet. All whole foods are pretty nutrient dense, even if they are, potatoes that people may not think are, great, but better than eating a whole bunch of highly processed foods and refined grains and added sugar and all the seed oils and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think that was the biggest change was we just shifted our diet into these more empty calorie foods, low nutrient foods, highly processed foods, and actually the seed oils are I think are a huge part too is switching from natural fats to these highly refined oils that have many problems.
Yeah, the fact that people demonized butter, man, you kidding me? Butter's so good. But onto your point, I grew up in a Greek family. My parents were born and raised in Greece. I have multiple relatives that lived over 100 years old,
Mhm.
and they grew up dirt poor up in the mountains of Greece, and which is pretty wild and incredible. But I remember going to Greece growing up, and I remember as a child, I'm 42 years old now, and I remember when I was young, again, I went and I saw everyone, and everyone looked healthy. And then as I continued to grow up and continue to visit, I would notice that all the corporations and all the popular places like McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts and Kentucky Fried Chicken, all these places would show up in Athens. The large movie theaters, like our culture, our way of life started infiltrating these places. And more people, more and more children just started looking unhealthier, more overweight, on top of whatever you want to say in terms of like the family system has, been destabilized as well and how that impacts, again, like your relationship to yourself, your relationship to food, and emotional eating is a big piece too. But it just seems so obvious to me, what's shifted and changed over time on that front. But I'm blown away by that.
It's big, and I've noticed it around the world, and that's what happens in Africa. It's like Africa is actually pretty healthy. Like this old, like there are some parts of Africa that, like if you're in a very harsh climate, they actually don't have enough calories. But there's a lot of Africa that has enough calories. They just don't have good nutrition, or they're just starting to have this poor nutrition come in. But they're actually pretty healthy. It's interesting. I went during COVID. I went a year and a half ago, and everyone's like pretty fit. Like they're doing fine. They're not starving. They just don't have all the processed foods that we have, and they're still doing pretty well. And they weren't even doing COVID. It was interesting. They just didn't do it. They didn't have the mask. They didn't have anything. They were just
Yeah,
like, they were just doing the thing and they were fine. Like, and I visited hospitals, I visited clinics. There wasn't like secretly people dying everywhere. Like we were there trying to interview people. They were
yeah.
fine, but they're just sort of like 30 years behind us, where they're like us back in the 70s, where everyone looked pretty good. And but because they can't even afford McDonald's, For us, McDonald's is one of the cheaper foods. You go over there no locals can afford McDonald's. That's for tourists.
It's it's pretty crazy, man. Let's hopefully they stay that way for another 30 years without watching the similar decline take place that has here for sure. Man, what I want to bring up with you is in 2015, I think like many of us, Cowspiracy came out, right? And I watched this documentary, and this blew my mind. I was like, I turned vegan on the spot. I
Mm.
convinced my entire family to turn vegan. All my friends, how dare you? I became the virtue signaling vegan police. But I noticed this intense. Like I held on to that rock for so long, for 5 years, but towards the end, like I think reintroduced meat into my diet in 2020. Like the degree of brain fog that I was experiencing became undeniable. Like my ability to reason, to rationalize, to even hold a conversation for like an extended period of time and
Mhm.
maintain being on topic and on point and all the rest of it slid to such a degree. Um, and then I reintroduced meat back into my diet, and immediately I began to feel much more grounded, much more in control, much more capable, higher self esteem, even I'd say would be a byproduct of that as well. Um, what are your thoughts on this? Because there seems like there was just this huge 5 year, 6 year gap when these documentaries came out, and all of a sudden, there was a huge percentage of Western population that all of a sudden was like, yeah, okay, veganism is the way, and it seems as though it's kind of shifting back to some kind of normalcy now, so to speak. But can you comment on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's actually how I got started with this 5.5 years ago when I made the film. So I definitely made myself watch Cowspiracy, which is hard to watch. But then What the Health came out,
Mm.
Yep,
and
that was the other one.
maybe I
Yep.
didn't watch it immediately, but I remember that, yeah, when I watched it, and that's when I decided I need to make a film that will tell the truth because that was just so bogus. And it's basically anti-scientific when you look at it. And I interviewed tons of doctors and scientists. I don't even know how they found those people in those movies. They find like the one vegan doctor or like the one vegan, even the Game Changers. The Game Changers, the
Yeah, yeah,
newer
with the
one,
athletes. Yeah.
the athletes, and then they find the one anthropologist. There was one woman who was talking about how starches and grains, like maybe it was just starches, like sugar made us become human. I'm like, no one thinks this. Like you are the only anthropologist on earth that thinks that. Everyone knows it's meat and animal foods. And there it's like the exact opposite of the consensus of the every scientist in the world is we ate meat, we became human, our brains got bigger. I could go through the whole history, which we actually do in the film. Where the film turned into a 6-part series, and we're starting with the human evolution. It's all about fat and organs and eating animals completely nose to tail. And so yeah, so many lies out there. The vegan thing is interesting. They're people who are trying to do good, right? They're trying to be moral, they're trying to help the environment, and they're trying to be healthy, right? Those 3 things are like the pillars. They're just going about it in the wrong way. And that's kind of what I learned because before I got into this stuff, I had no preference. I was eating the food pyramid diet, actually. I wasn't like obsessed with meat or anything, and I didn't go vegan. I was just kind of in the middle. I'm like, yeah, I'm eating my grains, I'm doing all the right things. I'm eating low fat. I'm eating all the vegetables and all that, and it just wasn't serving me well at all. So, uh, I kinda yeah, really just did this science based. But also what I'm saying is the if you only look at the surface level arguments of the vegan stuff, it could look good, right? And I think that's what happened to that's what you're talking about, the 5-year period, all these films come out.
Yeah.
If you're just saying, "Hey," if you look at the mainstream, uh view of things, it's better to not kill animals. Or since the government has said that saturated fat is bad for you and butter's, bad, and they have these bad science and bad recommendations, then you just assume that I'm going to be healthy if I do this. And then the environmental factor, that's just kind of what everyone's saying. It's like kind of this conventional view is, oh man, cow farts and like
Yeah.
it's ruining the planet. I mean, it all sounds kind of reasonable until you actually look into it. So that's the thing. You have to go down below the surface level. And not many people do that. And not many people have time for it. Right. That's our culture is just like you just hear the headline and then that's it. You
Yeah.
just go with the headline.
Yeah.
And that's why
Well,
veganism yeah.
the big driving force, because I consider myself someone that likes to go below the surface, and what's under the surface with the veganism side is the China study, which is apparently the longest running study of all time, supporting the link between, I guess,
Mhm.
meat and an increase in heart disease, I believe.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that. People should Google or use whatever search engine, Denise Minger China study. Denise Minger, amazing woman. She's in the film and I interviewed her. She did very extensive breakdown and rebuttal and debunking of the China study. And one of my favorite parts of that was the Tuoli province. And so this was left out of the China study, that they ate the most meat and they had the least heart disease. And they just didn't put it in. They just didn't,
Yeah.
because there's two things. There's a China study that's the actual study, and then there's a book called the China study,
Yeah, there's the book. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the book just completely left this part out. There's so many contradictions, and Janice Minger breaks it all down and does an amazing job that I'm not going to try to do right now. But just know that that's just an example. So it's called cherry picking, right? So it's like the vegan author who wrote the China study book based on the China study didn't include all the stuff that went against their narrative.
Yeah. What a surprise to cherry pick data to push a particular agenda, as if that doesn't happen all the time when you really dive in and look into things going on in the mainstream scientific establishment. Yeah, I remember reading some debunking of the China study years ago. I don't know if it was Dr. Was it Gary Taubes? How do you
Gary
pronounce his last
Taubes,
name? Gary Taubes. I feel
yeah,
like
he's
I'm
in the
at
film as well.
Taubes.
He's great.
Cool. Yeah, and on to game changers too. I just happened to read an article the other day because Canelo Alvarez just fought Triple G for the boxing championship, and he had gone vegan because of game changers. He went vegan before his fight against, I think it was, what's his name? Bevel was his name. I could be wrong, but it was he went up in a weight class and he ended up losing, and people were surprised he lost. And he's like, after that match, he's like, yeah, I'm going back to eating how I was gonna eat. Like, that just didn't work. But again, you have these people, you have some of these athletes, you have a narrative. Media is really strong in terms of how it impacts your consciousness. And so the other thing we haven't really touched upon, I mean, Joel mentioned it from a virtue signaling standpoint, but like most people want to be seen as a good person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so when you take these surface level arguments, like, I care about the world, I care about the environment, I care about animals. I don't want animals to die. My dog, like, I love dogs. I wouldn't want to eat my dog. I would cows. I get it. You know, I understand. Like, I grapple with that idea, and at the same time, it just seems when you think historically, anthropologically, and when you're in tune with nature, a vegan diet seems pretty anti-nature to me in terms of how things go on in nature. So yeah,
Mhm.
man. I mean, and the other thing I want to comment, because at the end of the day, I'm cool with individual choice. If you want to be a vegan and you want to choose this life and you feel it's the best for you, choose it. You know, it's just I've come across in my journey and clients over the years, like people who have chosen to be vegan, health issues, you know, skin issues, hair issues, and beyond that, even if they look healthy, it's the psycho-emotional challenges that come into play, whether you're navigating addiction or maybe there's some emotional issues and you're not as grounded. As a general rule, that's what I have found with the people that I've come across over the years. And I know so many ex-vegans that share the same story that Joel just shared, where they're like, man, I ate a bowl of cream, raw cream, or I ate a tub of butter and a fat steak, and I felt like something turned on in my brain. So can you talk a little bit about that? What is happening? Like, what are the misconceptions of
Mm.
veganism versus an animal-based diet?
Well, there's so many. I do think there's those 3 pillars, and we can do each pillar, right? There's environmental, there's moral, and then there's health. And the health stuff, what you're talking about, I don't think it's a human diet at all. And I think I've been unbiased in my journey and have, really just with an open mind just looked at the science. And from what I see, it's just not scientifically what humans should eat, right? We have a digestive system that evolved away from our chimp ancestors and now requires animal foods for just simple vitamins like B12, right? For one thing, but just even the way our digestive system works, like our small intestine and large intestine completely changed. And we don't have the large intestine that our ancestors did that just ferments plant foods. Like that's what gorillas and chimps and all these other animals, like a cow, it takes in these low quality nutrients and it ferments them, like, and then turns them into actually short chain fatty acids and that can fuel their body. We can't do that anymore. Our small intestine grew where that's where we digest the animal foods, and that's because we got so much good nutrition from them, and it helped our brains grow. And so that's why we do need animal foods for the nutrients and just for how our bodies are designed. And so I think people can get away with it for a short time. And of course, they're going to feel better
Yeah.
if they have been eating the standard American diet and then they eat a whole foods diet and they're completely cutting out all these food groups, they're eating less. They don't without knowing it, right? Some people, vegans, they get really skinny because they're just sort of malnourished. It's a good way
Mhm.
to lose weight because it's almost like a starvation diet that allows you to still eat. It's almost like fasting, but while eating, because your body's actually not getting good nutrition, right? So
Yeah,
that's what it is. So
I
what's
was just
that?
gonna say, yeah, I think I experimented with veganism for like a week, like shortly after moving to LA in like 2013. And I think I lost weight just in that week, but I also felt way more scattered, way more emotionally reactive. Like I didn't feel grounded. I didn't feel solid in who I was as a man. I just felt like the wind was just gonna blow me over. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm done with that. I can't keep doing this.
For me in the beginning, I felt actually quite incredible. But looking back, I think it was kind of like a detox, maybe potentially like a little detox period. But then ultimately, I wasn't really restoring with anything.
Well, there's also the placebo impact too, you know, like I'm doing this thing. I'm making a change in my diet. And everyone says it's good and it's healthier and it's the best way to be. Like that's going to have an impact on you in my opinion. Now, you can comment on that
Oh,
if you want,
absolutely.
Brian, you know.
No, absolutely, it is. There's so many things. That's what we're talking about. If you're being intentional about the way you eat, you're making healthier choices.
Yeah.
There's so much. There's science based around that too. It's not well. Placebo effect is science actually,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're doing so many things. You're making healthier choices. You're also yes, you are probably detoxifying from the standard American diet, right?
Yeah.
You went from complete garbage to some. I think veganism could be fine for like a month if you want to as like some sort of detox or you're kind of doing a fast while eating. I stand by that. You're doing a fast while eating and fasting is great. You know, it does help your body to not always have to deal with well, so many bad foods all the time or just not having to digest so much stuff. But it just isn't long term. It just doesn't work long term because you're not getting all the nutrients you need. And even if you do supplement, some people who are wealthy enough to do it, you know, the people who make it work seem to be really athletic, like super like endurance athletes type that not only have a lot of money to do it, but they really focus on health and exercise and they're and they also I think because they eat such a high volume of food because they're exercising so much, you know, these endurance athletes, then they can maybe get just enough nutrition out of that plant food just by volume, right? If they're eating like 5,000 calories a day of plant foods and then going on all these runs, like in the Game Changers, one of the guys in the film was they follow around. It was a ultra endurance athlete that ran across the country. Yeah, he's getting so much nutrition, so many calories per day that he's getting an okay amount of nutrition. But uh, normal people, they're not going to do it correctly. They're going to lose weight and feel better. But then, as I'm saying, if it keeps going, then they're not going to end up well, and or they end up overweight because they're eating processed vegan foods, right?
It's
Like
like the
there's so
the junk vegan diet.
yeah. So it's like you go 2 directions. I think both are malnourished. You can be too thin and malnourished, or you can be obese and malnourished at the same time. And that's actually a line from the film. One of our great doctors in film. We're at a crazy time in history where you can be obese and malnourished at the same time.
Interesting statement. So like in terms of like agendas, what are the coincidences that took place, I guess, perhaps in the 1980s when the food pyramid was introduced, or even in the last 5 to 7 year period with the rise of veganism and plant-based diets? What do you think that's correlated with in the bigger picture in terms of why is that coming in so heavily?
Mm. Well, I like to get into this stuff on like why it happens. I did a presentation actually at a conference and it was called exposing the $1 trillion agenda against red meat. So I think this has kind of been going on for about 100 years, where there is kind of this idea of man, it's kind of like the kings and the peasants. If that you know
Mhm.
what I mean? I think if you go back to the history of just even like how these wealth and hierarchy classes existed, it's when we started refining processing grains in like ancient Egypt. And the pharaohs accumulated all this wealth. And I think it's like kind of remnants of that where you have kind of these people that make all the money and have the power by controlling the food system really. That still happens today. The people who are in control of the narrative are the people making all the money from the food system, from pharma, from everything, right? This is where all the money is where the power, and that's where the message is coming from. If before we had all this messaging of plant-based, people would just eat normal foods, and that goes back 50s. What's a dinner? It's a roast, it's chicken, it's beef, it's some vegetables, it's some potatoes. Like this is what we always ate. Something guided us away from that. And I always get like kind of conspiratorial. I'm like, why did we go away from that? For all of history, we knew that animal foods were healthy. Every day was a fight to get animal foods. Still in
Mm.
Africa. Speaking of Africa, I talked to all these people. What is their daily mission? Make enough money to afford some meat. They
Mhm.
know the meat's healthy. They're like, some of them can't afford that much meat and it sucks and they hate it. And all they want to do is make enough money to afford meat because they know it's good nutrition. And so I'm like, what changed? Like, why did this happen? And yeah, I mean, there was bad science that was done. And we tell the story of why that happened. And it started in the 1950s and, thinking that saturated fat was bad. And that's sort of a little rabbit hole. There's even the food pyramid, the guidelines, even earlier, they actually were different. They actually had only 3 to 4 servings of grains at one point. And then the food in the people in like what's it called? These big industry, the corn, wheat, and soy lobbies pushed it and changed it to 7-Eleven. They actually did have influence on this. They have lobbyists because they make so much money off it that they can actually lobby to get these new guidelines switched. And also, there's just not that much. They couldn't afford to feed the world this. So, if you have uh, the government has to pay for the food for like the healthcare system, for the military, for nursing homes, for
Mm.
food stamps, all this stuff. They realize there's documented case of this, of them saying, "Hey, we can't pay for this if it's fresh meat and fresh vegetables and fresh foods. We're not going to be able to pay for the food stamp program. We're not going to pay for all the hospitals and the VA and the prison systems, even the school systems that have the subsidized programs. So it's way cheaper to just feed them on cheap subsidized corn, wheat, and soy. So yeah, it kind of goes back to money and
Mhm.
just big industry. And there's no money in whole foods. You know what I mean? Like there's no money in meat. There's no money in vegetables. There's no money in fruit. It's not like there's a big profit margin on them. The profit margin is on the processed foods. So that's kind of what happened, is that the processed foods have so much money that they can do the studies, they can do the commercials, and do the marketing. They can afford the lobbyists, and that's really like how it guided us to where we are.
Yeah. I remember again a while ago reading about, was it the Ansel Keys study? Was that the
Yep,
study that
the
kind of
7 country
showed?
study.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's Ansel Keys. So I briefly mentioned that was started in the 50s, and Ansel Keys, and there was this idea. President Eisenhower had a heart attack in the 1950s. This is also when everyone was smoking, right? This is they're smoking in elevators, they're smoking in their baby's room, they're smoking in their car, they're smoking in the shower. No, they're smoking, they're just constantly smoking, and they started eating a lot more vegetable oils actually and processed foods. So there's all this more heart disease. And then they got this bright idea that it was animal foods. And Ansel Keys was the okay, there was something called the Committee, and they put this group together and they were trying to figure it out. They didn't have all the science back then. And Ansel Keys was one of the guys that thought it was saturated fat. And he actually, this is a good example of cherry picking. He actually looked at 22 countries and w- the their relationship of saturated fat and heart disease. And it was kind of all over the place. But he just chose 7 of those countries that actually fit his narrative, that the more saturated fat they ate, the more heart disease. There's actually another guy, John Yudkin, and he was an English guy, and he had a completely different idea. He thought that it was because the sugar and the flour and the vegetable oil. He said whenever countries adopt these 3 refined ingredients, that's when they get the heart disease. And so it was the competing theories. And Ansel Keys won out. The quick story is he won out. He uh, for whatever reason, I think maybe people wanted him to win out.
Yeah.
But yeah, And then that kind of just opened up the door because if you're saying, oh, okay, it's the refined ingredients, it's the refined flours and sugar and oil, that just screws all the big food companies. So guess who won? Well, Keys, and that like gave the green light to all these food companies to take out fat and add in basically sugar, flour, and oil.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've moved away from localized ways of doing things to feeling that we need to centralize everything, let's make things bigger, faster, cheaper, etc. And one of my early documentaries I watched right when it came out was Food Inc. In 2007 with was it like Michael Pollan and some other people. I remember I was first introduced to Joel Salatin and that, and it just showcased like the again, like we see in so many different industries, the incestuous relationship between like government and industry and how they just go back and forth, from the board of a company to working for the government. And then people are just creating the laws, and there's all these conflict of interests that play into it. And this idea that we need to feed the whole world as opposed to like what if just different localized environments just focused on each other and had regenerative agriculture and just good healthy foods and proper farming as opposed to all this industrialized farming, which is just insane to me. But anyways.
Well, feed the world, that's a good one. So people, yeah, think we had to feed the world. If each community fed itself, then by default, you just fed the world,
Yeah.
right? It just if we do it locally and we could feed the world. So it's like the top-down approaches never work. When they're like, "Oh, let's feed the world," and our idea is to like send sacks of grain to Africa, that's when it doesn't work. You know?
Yeah.
You
No, it makes sense, and it kind of relates to we interviewed G. Edward Griffin on the podcast last week, and we're
Oh,
talking about
really?
this idea of collectivism versus of individualism, and so it kind of plays into that as well. It's like instead of putting the individual at the center of society, we put the group, and so it's like we put feeding the whole world at the center of our agenda as opposed to let's just focus on like a more localized approach.
Yeah.
So I feel like
But
it relates in that manner.
but at what cost? Who's sacrificed? By putting the group at the center of society is always the question, and I think we're seeing that now for sure.
We are, and wow, J. Edward Griffin's a gangster. That's awesome. He's the man.
Yeah, bro, we're here for the truth, man.
Don't
That
mess
no, it's
around, dude.
amazing. No, I've yeah, I've known about him for a while. Once I started looking into all this stuff, like how the world really works, and then you get to him, and man, it's like the World Economic Forum and this new idea. It's like that's the thing. It's like the peak collectivism is their idea is that we're going to solve the problems by doing things from the top down, and that leads to the classic, you'll own nothing and be
Yeah.
happy. And I
Yeah.
can't believe they put that video out.
Oh my
And then
god, man.
and it sounds so good. So yeah, these people don't understand. For one, I think they don't understand history. Anyone who believes in that stuff, they don't understand history and how it's failed, and they don't understand just social, like human dynamics. And then they also, you don't, it sounds good in theory. And then you realize, oh, but then who owns everything? And you're like, oh, well, we do. It's like, but it's all good because we're going to be good. Don't worry.
Yeah, speaking of the demonization of meat, we've embarked on a whole new arena where it's like you will eat the bugs and be happy.
Yeah.
Like here, have some crickets, have some bugs, have this. You don't need any meat. Save the planet. Bugs are the answer. And again, I don't want to knock on other cultures that have eaten bugs and use that for protein source, but it's like back to what you were saying before, the people who have the power, the people that have the money, the people that are at the top of the food chain, you think they're chowing down on crickets and worms, even though they're putting out all the celebrity propaganda? No, they're chilling, they're having a nice filet mignon, and enjoying the deliciousness of some red meat.
Well, that's how it always goes. That's what I'm saying. That's how it always goes throughout history. People who think these are good ideas, they don't realize that the people orchestrating these plans are not following any of these rules.
Yeah.
It's just
Exactly.
it's for thee. It's like rules for thee, not for me. But that's what I'm saying. That's why it's always been throughout history. It's the same thing. The
Just repeating
pharaohs
itself.
and the
Yeah.
slaves. Yeah, but throughout history, I was watching a couple of years ago. I watched man, that Netflix show, The Last Kingdom, and it was
Yeah.
about, like, the Vikings versus the Englishmen and back in, like, whatever, 1500s, or maybe it was I forget already. Does It's the same thing. You have the kings, they're eating the finest foods, and they just have to make decisions for the greater good. It's actually this really complicated problem like, the greater good. You know what I mean? It's like, this is a hard thing to do because I think it always goes poorly, though, when you're trying to do something for the greater good, it kind of always doesn't end up working.
Yeah.
As
You know,
as G. Edward Griffin's Aunt Ellis said, the
uh,
road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
yeah, and he commented on that last week too, where it's like, well, the idea of like the greater good for the greater number, like, oh yeah, I like that goal, but the way we go about doing it is the issue. And this is where he went into talking about needing to make the individual at the center of society as opposed to the group. And the challenge with collectivism is the person who has the most power, everything we're talking about now, they're the ones who decide what's best for the collective,
Yeah.
you know?
It's never really the group's interests. It's the individuals within the group who exert the most influence, whose agenda is being ensued. So we've skirted around it a fair bit, but I really
Mhm.
want to get to, I guess, this. In your opinion, in all
Mhm.
your research, what is the ideal diet for a human being? I know it's a vague question. It's one that's
Oh,
thrown
no,
around a
yeah.
lot, but what's your take here?
I love this question. It is what I think about. I think about how we got here, where we went wrong, like why we end up in this mess. And when you answer that, you kind of end up, so what is the ideal diet? So
Yeah.
it's like kind of like all I think about. And man, I've evolved my thinking, and I'm kind of glad that the film didn't come out 5.5 years. Well, it wasn't going to come out that quickly, but I started it, and it took so long, and it's been a journey, and I've come at it with an open mind, and I've changed my opinion, and I think I'm less biased now. So, to answer the question, it is a framework, and it's pretty simple. It's really based on the idea that animal foods are healthy, whole foods are generally good, and processed foods are the problem. So it's kind of the opposite paradigm. So in the mainstream, they will say animal foods are bad and processed foods are fine, right? They're just like, oh yeah, like it's just about calories in, calories out. You can eat a bagel, you can eat Cheez Its, you can eat anything as long as you count your calories, and all foods are good. And it doesn't matter if it's highly refined and has like 100 ingredients in it. It's just calories. And animal foods are bad, avoid them at all costs. It's really just exact opposite. We're fighting the wrong enemy. I'm going to get specific, don't worry. I'm starting high level. High level is, we're fighting the wrong enemy. They're saying that meat and fat and butter and animal foods are bad and that processed foods are fine. That is why we're in this mess. That is why you can give all these statistics. 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. Newer study, only 7% are metabolically unhealthy. So 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. This is crazy. That's just because we're fighting the wrong enemy. Of course, you're not going to get anywhere if you're fighting the wrong thing. Of course, it's not working because animal foods are great. They're the pillar of human health, and processed foods are the problem. So you just have to recognize that. So that's the highest level of like what a good diet
Mhm.
is embracing animal foods and whole foods and realizing processed foods are the problem. And so what does that mean more practically? Or I mean, what do I eat? What have I come down to? I eat any animal foods. I eat beef, I eat lamb, I eat chicken, I eat sausage. I don't have a problem with sausage. A sausage, if it's just, if it's just meat, like it's just meat. Processed meat, I think, is not is not a bad thing. I think processed meat gets a bad name because people eat hot dogs and sodas and buns and ketchup filled with corn syrup and milkshakes, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, it's the hot dog." Like, well, no, not at all. I mean, I don't think hot dogs like a health. I mean, I'm not just going to eat hot dogs all day, but
Yeah.
I think the bun of the hot dog and everything else around it was the bad problem, the bad part. So I eat all kinds of meats, all kinds of fats. I I think all kinds of just whole foods, fruit, I think is great. Fermented vegetables, especially, I like, traditionally prepared foods. Like we've been like fermenting things, like sauerkraut. I think that's great. Uh, I don't know. I just kind of avoid the processed foods, I think bread is a processed food. People don't really realize that. They think, oh, bread, being forever. Well, we haven't been eating the bread that we eat nowadays forever. It wasn't always like soaked in glyphosate forever. It wasn't
Yeah.
like monocropped and like poor soil and just covered in pesticides and herbicides and highly refined and also just not even traditionally prepared. This bread we get is not the traditional bread. Traditional bread, it's like fermented and overnight, this, and we eat sourdough and you had, this fermentation process that takes like 2 days, one, overnight or two, even to up to 3 days. That actually helps make it more healthy. It sort of, gave more nutrients, got rid of some of the anti-nutrients. So people don't realize that bread is a processed food. Pasta is a processed food, highly refined, just long shelf life. Same thing, having additives, having herbicides, glyphosate, all this kind of stuff on it. People don't understand that these are processed foods. So the 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 high level view is there isn't a specific diet. It's kind of framework, and the framework is embracing animal foods, embracing whole foods, and realizing that even bread and pasta are processed foods and trying to minimize those as well.
Mm. Um, like obviously there's a lot of fear and warning around fish, particularly these days with mercury levels, whatnot. What are your thoughts on seafood and I guess fish and the whole mercury paradigm in general? Is that valid or
Mm. Could be. I mean, so big fish like tuna are have a lot of mercury in it because they are giant fish that eat all of the smaller fish below it and it accumulates, right? So it accumulates as the fish get bigger because they eat all the smaller fish and it bioaccumulates. So I wouldn't eat tuna every day. I think farm fish are a problem. If people eat farm salmon, it's actually they eat like food pellets. It's actually really gross. They just like dump a bunch of kibble, this like fish kibble, and it's the same thing. It's just like highly refined with herbicides, pesticides. It's just a nightmare. So yeah, I would eat wild caught fish. Absolutely. Super, super highly nutritious. Even better, I think, is just like uh lobster, oysters, all these other fish, shrimp. Like you're eating the whole animal. Like if you're eating a shrimp, it's like you're getting all the nutrients in it. You're getting oyster. It's like you're eating the entire organism. You're getting a
Mm.
ton of nutrients. Like people, you could be vegan, I think, and just eat oysters once a week or, a few times a week and be okay. They have so much nutrition. They have so much zinc and iron and B12.
Yeah, I wanna jump in on that real quick. Is I had a friend of mine who's a vegan, and I mean, absolutely just I respect her because she just loves animals to no
Mhm,
degree, or to the highest degree.
mhm.
And, I had recommended, because I think she was dealing with some health issues, I recommended, like, "Would you be open to having liver capsules? Even just the liver capsules as a vegan?" And she started incorporating liver capsules, and I think Shilajit, and she started feeling so much better just from that simple act of getting some organ meat in her. So maybe if you can comment on that because it relates to what you were saying about a vegan just having some oysters.
Liver and oysters are kind of two of the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. I'm telling you, they can give you enough nutrients to survive as a vegan. I wouldn't recommend it, but
Yeah.
people don't eat these foods anymore. And this is an interesting one. People think that oysters are aphrodisiac. I've come to revelation about this. They're not aphrodisiac. What they do is they have a ton of zinc and iron and B12 and all these things that people are short on. They even have copper, like these hard to get
Mhm.
nutrients, minerals that are really needed. So the entire population is walking around lacking in all those vitamins, minerals. They eat an oyster, all of a sudden their body works again. Their body's like, "Man, you gave us some nutrients. Let's reproduce." Humans,
Yeah.
this is how humans work. If you are on the edge of dying or you're nutrient deficient, your body isn't trying to make babies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Same thing for women. Women lose their period if they go vegan. A lot of women lose their period because they're not getting enough nutrients. They're not their body's like, we're shutting down. We're not gonna have babies. You don't have enough nutrients. Same thing with guys. They lose their libido, they lose their erections, they lose all kinds of stuff. Actually, there's a story. Tim Sheaf, he was in the Game Changers. He dropped out. I interviewed him for the film. He was the vegan prince, they called him. He was an athlete and he went vegan. And then something compelled him to eat salmon. And he's like, he told this story. He's like, one day I just was compelled to eat it. He's talking about how he lost his entire sex drive, had no erection. He was just a nightmare, just completely lost his manhood. That night, he had a wet dream. It all came
Mhm.
back in one night after the first day he ate salmon, and everything came back to life, and he never looked back, and he eats an animal-based diet now. So it it's crazy. It's your body. So yeah, so the oyster story is that that's why people think it's aphrodisiac, just because it has all the vitamins and minerals that people are lacking in. And so it just gets normal people back up to baseline. So, man, there liver is one of them, oysters, um, yeah, salmon, like just these foods, well, salmon people eat, but a lot of the foods that people don't really eat much anymore that we used to eat in the past. People, my grandpa used to eat liver and onions. Most
Yeah.
grandparents, right? Like or you go around talking about Greece, they're eating all kinds of things over there. They're eating all the bits and pieces. Everywhere you go, they eat all the bits and pieces, except for the really modernized places. Australia, England, America. Like these are the places where people are just like, give me a chicken breast, give me some beef. Like they
Yeah.
don't want all the bits and pieces.
You
And those
know,
are the healthiest parts.
yeah, growing up, my parents are old school, and Easter's a really big holiday for the Greeks. And the night of Easter, the night before Easter, they make a soup called margherita, and they put literally all the organ meats and all this other stuff in it. And then they also have a dish where it's like they wrap, I don't know, they wrap something or meat in the intestines as well. I mean, it's just, yeah, these different cultures, man. They ate everything. I mean, it was really like nose to tail. They honored that, respected that, because even in like, I think back in the days, even the paleo community, before people started getting more hip to organ meats, the focus was on muscle meat. But it's like just having muscle meat is not the answer either. You need to be able to incorporate and get the nutrition from eating organs as well. Do you agree with that?
And it's hard. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
hard for people. I get it. And I mean, my company's called Nose and Tail, so I definitely agree with it. And we try to sneak it in people's diets. Like I have my main product actually is ground beef with organs mixed in. So it
Mm.
has kidney, heart, liver, and spleen. It's the way I eat organs. I don't really care for eating liver. I mean, I'll eat some raw liver actually. I think it tastes a little better to just kind of eat it raw, or you kind of just swallow it.
Do you
Uh,
make like the little like small cubes and swallow it, or do you
yeah,
get like all
yeah.
hardcore like Liver King and just hold it and just take a bite out of it?
Oh, I did that when I went to Africa. I almost went to Africa with him. This woman, Mary, took me. She kind of helped me plan my trip a year and a half ago, and then she took him about 6 months ago. I think he went, and I got disinvited at the last second. But we ate liver with the Hadza, and they do that. They kind of just they take it. Yeah, they open up this animal right when they killed it, cut out the guts, and then just immediately, like, sliced into the liver and gave me
Yeah.
some, and they just eat it. That was great.
Well, this is again where nature has the intelligence and so much wisdom for us. If you look at animals, and correct me if I'm wrong, when an animal goes for a kill, they go directly for the organs. They're not sitting there eating the muscle meat all day. So again, like that should be a sign that that's where the most nutrition is. And so, how can we take this wisdom from the animal kingdom and integrate it into our lives?
It's very true. It's the first thing. So, like I said, the Hadza, that's the first thing they go for, and it's highly prized, and they share it amongst everyone. There's other cultures that, yeah, only the best hunters get the liver. There's, yes, all kinds of animals. I saw a video recently in South Africa of the killer, what was it? A killer whale going for a shark, killing a shark and eating its liver. And
Wow.
there's even accounts of when there was a time of abundance in I don't remember when the times were, if it was like a Lewis and Clark sort of uh like journal that they talked about they had when they had excess meat, they would just leave a lot of the muscle meat. They would eat the organs and the fat and all the good
Mhm.
stuff first. And then if they had excess, yeah, just throw the muscle meat to the dogs.
Yeah. I like what you said about the getting the ground beef mixed. My wife and I, we try to do that when we can, and I like to make like a little bolognese sauce or something with
Mhm.
that, with because it, the I mean the reality is this: we've been conditioned for generations out of of having a taste for a lot of these organ meats because people haven't been eating them, you know. Yes, our ancestors, we go back many generations, but last, 30, 40, 50 years, people aren't just sitting there like having liver all the time. So I think it's going to take a little time for us to build a palate for it. And I'm trying to do what I can. I mean, there's times where I forget and I'm like, oh man, I need to have some more liver. I mean,
Mm,
I do like chicken livers.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and or I forget to take my capsules. And what do you think? Obviously, eating the real thing is best, but if you can't, are you a fan of like the freeze dried capsules?
Yeah, I think they're fine. Yeah, it's definitely better than nothing, and absolutely, why not? If that's what you're gonna do, then do it.
Yeah,
Yep.
cool. I want to real quickly. I just want to go back a little bit because we were talking about something, and I wanted to get your take on this. When you think about grains and breads, I mean, you look at some cultures like Italy, for instance. A
Mhm.
lot of those people have lived to be over 100 years old, so they're eating these things, and that relates also to. Um, I've had so many people that I know that have gone to Europe or relatives or friends that have gone to visit Greece and like they'll eat the dairy there, or they'll eat the bread there, and they're like, I'm fine. And they
Mhm.
come back to the US and they're like, fuck. And so do you think the main
Yeah.
reason is just how it's grown and like the pesticides and the glyphosate? And maybe it hasn't caught up to that the same degree that it has here, there, or is it something else? Or because they're on
I
vacation
think
and they're
it's
like, yeah, life is great.
no.
Fuck it.
Oh, I mean, there might be a little bit of that where they're just enjoying life. It's that mindset. It's a little the placebo effect. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's a little part of it for sure. But I think there's kind of maybe 3 main points to why it works. And there's a guy, Dr. Bill Schindler, who's great, who gets into this. He travels around the world. He's a food scientist. He's an anthropologist, archaeologist. So he taught me a lot of this stuff. It's how it was raised and how it was made, how it's grown, how it's made. So it's every step of the process is different. He says they shouldn't be called the same things. They shouldn't even be called the same thing. The cheese, you're right, dairy and bread. They should not be allowed to be called the same thing because he's like the difference between like American cheese, like a craft single, and a real cheese that you get in Europe is night and day. Even though you're like, hey, this looks like cheese, this looks like cheese, they're completely different. And same thing with the bread, completely different from even the type of grains they are. Like they're using sort of ancient grains, maybe the like more non-modified older grains. They are not monocropped, probably. They are not soaked in glyphosate because they actually have different rules over there. Then they are not they're refined, they're fresher, they're not as refined. They don't like sit, in a factory for months. They're fresher. Then they are actually prepared properly. Like I was talking about the fermentation and you can sprout things, you can soak things. There's all these traditional methods. And then they don't have additives in them too. It's like in the US, you have fake sourdough. It's like it has citric acid, so it makes it taste you don't actually ferment it and get that sour flavor from actually doing the right fermentation process. They just because they're trying to make more money, and they don't have the time to let it ferment for 2 days. So they just add some citric acid. It tastes a bit sour, and there you go. And then, other additives, right? There's just all kinds of additives. They even fortify. They add in iron. This is a bad thing too, is we have fortification over here that we thought was a good thing. But it turns out if you just fortify things with iron, you don't want to just put in iron filings. Have you seen these YouTube videos where they look at cereal and you grind up cereal and it's fortified in iron? It's supposed to be a good thing, and then it's magnetic. And
Yeah.
this is real. It's like they're just putting iron filings in your cereal, and this is not the same iron that's in meat. That's heme iron. That's good iron that your body can use. You're just trying to fortify breads and cereals with basically iron filings. That's not good. And a lot of people think that's a huge problem. So from start to finish, they're completely different products. Same thing with the dairy. If you're getting grass fed dairy from a cow that like eating good grass that again isn't soaked with glyphosate, and then you're getting that fresh and you're fermenting the cheese and you're doing it correctly, completely different ballgame. It has all the enzymes. Also, it's not pasteurized. Most dairy in the US is pasteurized. 99% is pasteurized if you look at the volume. That heating process is supposed to be safer for us, but it actually just gets rid of all the enzymes that help your body digest them. So a lot of people who say they're lactose intolerant can actually eat raw dairy because you actually have the enzymes still in it that aren't heat treated away that allows your body to digest them.
Oh, yeah, thanks for that. Joel, I'd cut you off before. I don't know if there's something you wanted to touch on.
No, I've just been sitting here fuming about it for the last 10 minutes. It's all right. I'm joking. All right. So obviously, like factory farming is catastrophic. It's devastating. I think it's an absolute tragedy to the animal kingdom. Me myself personally, at this point in time, I can't see myself actually killing an animal. There's something within me that doesn't like that, wouldn't enjoy that process. I see life. If I look into a cow's eyes, there's life there. There's a living being there. Obviously these animals go through incredible
Mhm.
torture on some level. Like, how does one justify the incongruences with adopting an animal-based diet and also having this empathy for the animal kingdom in general?
Good question. Yeah, we're getting back to the three pillars. We kind of covered the health angle.
Mm,
Mhm.
Then there's the moral angle, and then we can do the environmental angle, which kind of
let's
ties
do
into
it.
that because you're talking about, yeah,
Yep.
the environmental factors. So the moral thing, it is hard. I actually haven't really killed animals in any large animals, other than like bugs until pretty recently. Last Thanksgiving, I went to a turkey harvest and I, grabbed my own turkey and did the like little bolt to the head. It died instantly. And it was a sort of like an intense process, right?
Mhm.
It's something that I've not done before and most humans haven't done because we're just living in cities and we're kind of disconnected from our old way of life. But it was powerful. I, had a lot of respect for it, the animal and the process. And I think that's what our ancestors did as well. Like American Indians, they would have like ceremonies around and thank the animals. And it was like this whole thing, right? It was like they had great reverence for the animals that feed them. And we don't have that anymore. And another kind of like tidbit of information I found interesting is back in the day, maybe over 100 years ago, every single human would have seen multiple animals die before they could even talk. Right? If you're living any time for all of history till like 100 years ago, you wanted a chicken, you killed a chicken in your yard and you ate it. And this was just part of nature. This is part of life. It wasn't a a bad thing. It was something that we all knew and was normal because this is how the circle of life works. And for something to live, something must die. This is a fact of nature. Another person I've interviewed is amazing. Have you heard of Lear Keith?
No.
Mm-mm. Oh,
She's
yeah,
amazing.
the vegetarian myth book. Yeah, I read that when it came out. That book was powerful.
Amazing. She wrote The Vegetarian Myth, and she actually breaks down the three pillars. She has three sections of the book that do moral, environmental, and health. And she was a vegan for 25 years and had permanent damage to her spine, and from the lack of animal nutrition. And she will tell you all of this stuff in detail, but you can't separate like life and you can't not kill something. Like she even tried. She was like, I'm gonna grow my own garden and I'm gonna have no death. And then she ended up killing these bugs. Then she ended up killing the slugs. Then she had to like kill something else. She just realized for something to live, something must die. That's just the laws of nature. And some people choose to sort of step away from that and try not to see it. And that's how we're accustomed now because we just live in cities and it just shows up in a package. But that's just how the world works. And uh, and the best point for this is that more animals die to grow mass produce plant foods, crops,
Yeah.
grains, corn, soy, wheat, all this stuff that people think are great and guilt free and what so much of the vegan foods are based on have 10 times the amount of deaths than killing a cow. But it's just smaller animals, but they're not all small animals. I'm not talking about just like bugs. There are mice and there are baby birds and small deer and uh, all kinds of stuff that are killed. So there's studies out of Australia that show how many that per calorie. I forget how they did it per what. There was 10 times as many mice died growing c- corn or wheat than compared to an animal food. And they so animals die in all process of crop production. They die to clear the crops. They have to clear fields. They wipe out entire ecosystems to clear the cropland, right? You are displacing animals, you're killing them. It is crazy. I mean, maybe you don't see that happens once in the beginning, and now you have this cropland forever, supposedly, right? But then they're killed again when they're killed with all the herbicides, fungicides, all these things. They end up killing. You're spraying into killing all these different animals. They're also farmers have to kill animals to protect the land. They pay people, especially in Australia. Actually, they pay hunters to manage the foxes and all these other things that will eat the crops or eat their chickens or so they have pest management. They also are killed when they're harvested. They're chopped up in the combines, right? And so they actually have a brutal death being chopped up. And these are like baby deer and ground nesting birds and squirrels. And then here's one more time they die I didn't know about. Australian farmer told me about this. They all starved to death. All these animals, once you you harvest all the grain, harvest all the corn, whatever it is, all these animals that were relying on those crops, they're eating them. They're still there. They all starve to death. So
Yeah.
it's you're not gonna get out of it. So that's the thing. Vegans, the idea is you can get away from this death, and you can fool yourself into thinking you're getting away from this death because you just buy a package of fake meat, or you buy, oh, I'm just gonna eat beans and legumes or whatever vegans eat. That's still not getting out of it. You're tricking yourself. So it's just a law of nature. So it's sad but true.
Yeah, like that idea when you think about all the ecosystems that are taken down, when they have to till the land or create a new field for all the corn and the soy, et
Mhm.
cetera, like there's life, there's life there. And even I used to make this joke like, well, if you're vegan, you can't go on a road trip. Look at your windshield after you're
Mm.
done with a road trip. I mean, there's gonna be a whole lot of dead insects on your windshield. But I think there's this thing with that is that there's this anthropomorphizing of certain animals because they look more human, whereas the ones that maybe don't as much, you don't care,
Mhm.
but anyways, man, I don't need to, beat the horse dead,
Mhm.
pun intended, or
Ugh.
not intended. Anyways, um, that's all I gotta say
Well,
about that.
yeah, yeah, no. Joel's gonna ask about the environmental.
Hit us with it.
Um, yeah, well, because it kind of ties into that. So there's always a cost to create food, right? There's a toll on the environment. There's toll on whatever that you have to have some sort of energy and sort of repercussions to feed us, right? That's just how the world works. It's so you have to say, well, what's better? Like, and a lot of vegan arguments, they're saying, oh, well, there's so much grain and corn and to feed the animals, then to feed the humans who eat the animals, and that's not good. You should just eat the grains, and then you'd skip that whole middleman, right? And that see again, surface, it sounds good. It's like, oh yeah, why do I need to feed the animals this? And then, well, when you break it down, it actually falls apart. So for one thing, we don't want cows to eat corn and wheat and all these other ingredients, right? We don't want them in a feedlot. We want them out eating grass, which humans can't eat, right? So we'll just accept that yes, there is a problem if we're doing, feeding them good human food. But there's so much more to the argument. One is they're actually using leftover stuff that can't be eaten by humans, mainly. Most of the feed, I think it's 86% of a cow's diet is inedible to humans, right? So it's not like we're just growing all this stuff and giving to them. They grow it, they grow corn for ethanol, for biofuels. So they make the ethanol out of the corn, and then we get the leftover, give it to the cows. They make beer, they make vodka, they have all this distiller's grain. They have it left over, they give it to the cattle, right? It's actually a pretty efficient process. Another thing, the vegans say they're middlemen. Like, why do we need the middleman? That is actually the benefit. That's actually their best attribute is this quote middleman is they're upcycling nutrition. So having the cow eat it, they're eating low quality foods that humans can't eat and cannot get nutrition from and cannot get protein or minerals and vitamins from. And they're turning it into the most bioavailable, complete nutrition that humans need. It's a very good service. And there's a great study that looks at the protein specifically, because that's what humans need. We go back to what I said, that there's the first time in history we are obese and malnourished at the same time. That's because we're eating too many empty calories, right? Human bodies need protein, vitamins, and minerals, and some fats, right? These are the building blocks of our bodies. Then there's energy, which are, carbs and fats. Those are our energy sources. So most humans are getting way too much energy and not enough nutrients. That's how you can end up obese and malnourished. Does that make sense? If you're
Yeah.
eating, basically, why empty calories are bad. People know this. I grew up, don't eat empty calories. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, I don't really get it. It's like, oh yeah, candy, empty calories. That's why. Candy doesn't have protein, vitamins, and minerals. It's just pure energy, whether it be fat, carbs, or both, right? So that's the problem. Your body doesn't need, especially nowadays, we don't need extra energy. Everyone's got extra energy sitting on their bellies. That's what
Yeah.
extra energy is. It's body fat. Your body just stores it. So most people are walking around with all this extra energy in their body, not enough proteins and vitamins and minerals. So to go back to the study, you want to look at like the protein. That's what matters. That's what humans need. It's not like we need endless protein, but I mean, protein is what we need. The cows actually give us twofold the protein back than what they eat, meaning they eat a bunch of low quality food that has barely any protein in it, right? And over the course of their life, even in a feedlot, they eat X amount of protein. When we butcher that animal and eat it, we're getting 2x, an average of 2x the protein back. So that is the upcycling I'm talking about. That is the middlemen that the vegans are saying are bad. I'm saying that's a great thing.
Mhm.
That's amazing. We don't need calories anymore. Maybe 100 years ago, we need calories. Maybe in the Saharan desert, in some like really terrible place in Africa where they can't grow enough food, they need calories. What we need is better nutrition, right? And so that's why we do need to consider the quality of the nutrition of the foods we get, and the proteins, the vitamins, the minerals, and the bioavailability of those. And so that's where animal foods come in, and that's why that they're so superior, is that they have more bioavailable and complete nutrition that we can use.
What are your views on, obviously, you're talking about animal foods in general, and we're talking a lot about meat, but, eggs.
Oh man, eggs are kind of the world's perfect food. It's again, it's like kind of that complete nutrition. We're talking about like eating an oyster. You're eating the whole animal. You're getting a lot of nutrients by doing that. Eating an egg, it's like that could become a whole animal. Oh, it's not fertilized, right? So it's uh, you're getting so many nutrients that we need. A lot of choline specifically, like eggs, great source of choline. Eat the yolks. Absolutely, yolks are. That's so crazy that they were trying to say that the yolks are bad.
Cholesterol,
If you were eating,
cholesterol,
oh man,
cholesterol.
it was so crazy. What a nightmare that we avoided egg yolks for so long. Uh, yeah, eggs are amazing.
Yeah. I brought that up because 'cause I'm excited that we got chickens, like 5 months ago. They were little chicks, and now they started laying eggs, like, you know, a few weeks ago, and this morning I actually we have a rooster too. I had a fertilized egg. My wife said, "These are fertilized eggs that you're having." So anyways,
Mm.
I was just curious because also even in like the health world, you have some people like, "Do not eat the egg white under any condition, just the yolk." But then if you think of like a whole egg as a whole, like, do you think it's better to eat the whole egg or eat egg yolks raw but not, egg whites raw, and to cook the egg white? Like, this is where it gets so, like,
Oh well,
specific, where
that
people have their certain
yeah.
opinions.
People do get in that nuance, and I guess in a perfect world, I would cook the egg white and eat the yolk raw. I am a
Gotcha.
fan of that because people get into this like avidin, and there's like, oh, it gets really nuanced and kind of stupid. I think just
I
eat the
agree.
egg.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's the thing with the health world, man. Like, I've been in this industry and health and wellness and all this other things
Mm.
for so long, and it's so funny when it comes to nutrition, like, the wars that go on,
Yeah,
between people and experts and influencers are like, "You cannot eat a vegetable. How dare you?"
yeah. That's all. I'm seeing that all around me, and I'm trying to be in camp, no camp. That's my
Yeah.
thing. It's just, and that's why I was really high level when I was talking about what's the ideal diet. it's super high level because so many different diets work for different people. Although
Mhm.
that's a bit of a cop out because work is a, a relative term. There's this idea of thriving or surviving. And so many people are like kind of surviving and they're like, hey, well, but I'm vegan and I'm still alive. And I'm like, yeah, but you're just surviving. Like, or they'll point to different things at different populations. They are not thriving. Like when we were thriving, we were eating animal foods. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there is a difference. So I do
Yeah.
appreciate that everyone can do well on different diets, and it is true. But yeah.
Yeah, but there's also the geographical aspect as well. Like, I feel like, if you're in the Northeast in the winter, you might wanna be eating more, heavier, dense foods, and maybe, like, when you're in the summer in Arizona or somewhere, maybe you might be eating, more fruits, etcetera, so I think that plays a role too, I think. I'm
Well,
curious what your thoughts are. If people should
yeah.
eat the same foods every day no matter what the climate is.
No, 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 that's true. There's a lot to the seasonality of foods. I think that's where there are problems. So an example, kale and spinach. So I don't like to like scare people away from certain foods, but I did drink kale and spinach shakes like every day for like 2 years straight. That's not natural, right? You wouldn't be able to have like blended kale and spinach every day for 2 years. And so there's a whole bunch of oxalates. And I think I had problems and I stopped doing that and I felt better. So that is an example. But I'm also saying have a kale salad. Do what
Yeah,
you want, like it's not bad for you. There's some influencers out there like that say that it's gonna kill you. So you have to be thoughtful about it. Seasonality is big. Even geographically, like different people lived in different parts of the world. Yeah, people closer to the equator, maybe they're better adapted to eating more plant foods, right? But they
yeah,
still include animal foods. People closer to the equator, maybe they did. Yeah, they had more fruits year round. They had all kinds of starches, but they always had fish and they always had smaller animals and they always had all kinds of stuff. I don't care about people's ratios. You know what I mean? As long as they're eating whole foods and getting animal foods, you're going to be okay. And some people do better. People up north, exactly. You're up north. You maybe your ancestors ate giant animals, fatty animals, a lot of the year.
yeah,
Is there
yeah.
is there anything to be said for eating for your blood type? I know that was a thing at one point.
Oh, I I
Uh,
I've looked into a bit on that. I don't really think so. I think there could be maybe that it's just sort of remnants of that ancestral past kind of thing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like if your ancestors came more from the north, if you had like Viking ancestry, maybe there's more different blood types from that. So then they are used to eating more meat and fat. And then some people. So I think it's more about the geographical origin of your ancestors more than the
Mm,
blood type. Yeah.
yeah. I
cool.
think also what we're getting at here, and I think we're on the same page. I think anyone who gets into this, you can say, truth seeking world, whether it's about nutrition, whether it's about something else, but let's focus on nutrition. In the beginning, you get a little fanatical. You
Mhm.
start learning things and you're like, how dare you? I remember when I first started getting into health, I'd be like, how dare you drink that? What's going on? How are you eating that? It's horrible for you. And you just come to another place of more balance and you realize like there's so many elements that play into why one person is healthy versus another. Obviously, huge is a big thing, is a big deal, but like the psychological stress that you put on yourself when you're so restrictive and like you're like beating yourself up with every bite of cake you have when you go out one night and you're hanging out with friends or you're at some party, like that's probably
Mhm.
not good for you, as opposed to just being like, yo, fucking going out with Brian and Joel
Mm.
tonight, we're chilling
Mhm.
and we just ended up having like a cake or a pizza, and we're
Mhm.
just like feeling good about it, as opposed to then we go home that night and then for 24 hours the next day judging ourselves and beating ourselves up. That's probably not ultimately good for your body. Would you say?
100%. I am so in that camp.
Yeah.
So in that camp, and I know most people around me aren't. They don't get that part. And they're really obsessive compulsive about it. They have all this bad energy around it. I I have been open from day one about like I'll eat a piece of pizza, whatever. Like we're out, we're doing it, let's do it. Like this is so, and also about the camp. Yeah, in the beginning, I think you have to go on almost a 5 year journey, uh, to get out of those little camps and those
Yeah.
fanatical states that people are in the beginning. And that's why I said I'm glad I didn't make the film like very quickly and have it come out because I think I would have been just more in this sort of dogmatic camp.
Yeah, I'm
Speaking
still
of man,
grateful.
yeah, how is the film going and when can people expect it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on it now. As soon as I get off this call, I'm back to the film. It's been a long road. We're trying to make it so good. I would go to foodlies.org or go to my Food Lies YouTube channel, watch the intro. The intro was handmade by us. It took over a year to make this intro. It's very good. We're
It's a
going high
very, very,
quality.
very well produced intro. It is. I watched that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's literally what Joel said to me after we watched it. He was, "That is excellently produced. It's amazing."
Well, that's what we're doing. We're going for top quality production value. This is like there's been other nutrition films out there, and maybe people didn't see them, like because they just weren't good enough. There hasn't been that great a one. I mean, there's some maybe like Food Inc. back in the day was pretty
Yeah.
good, right? But I still don't agree with the message. The kind of the message was still like plants are amazing, avoid meat, you know?
Yeah.
So ours is fine. It's like plants are fine. Enjoy animal foods. That's kind of our. It's like a little bit of the. So yeah, we're trying to go full quality. We're working on every sentence. Like we're talking about every word and
Yep.
rewriting it, refilming stuff. We're flying around the country soon to refilm some interviews. It's we're going all out. We have a custom composer doing a custom score. We have graphic artists that we hired for over a year that's just doing each motion graphic all week, every week for entire year for this film.
Wow.
So trying to finish it by the end of the year and get it on Netflix, get on the biggest platforms we can. And it's a 6-part series, so we can cover a lot.
That's amazing. If you ever need any footage of chickens, you just come visit me in Topanga, okay? We're good to go.
I love it. We'll get some B-roll. Yeah.
Oh,
Incredible,
man.
man. I love the level of quality you're aiming for. And if you're gonna do something, why not do it as best as possible? And aim for that. That's awesome. Brian, thank you so much for this conversation. I've definitely taken a lot away from it. I'm sure our audience will as well. Do you have a final message that you want to share with our audience? And additionally to that, how can people best, I guess, get in contact and
Mm.
connect with you?
Well, yeah, that first, just search Food Lies. I'm on Instagram a lot. I'm on YouTube, Twitter, whatever. Just search Food Lies. I'm there. I try to put out like some message each day because I'm always learning, I'm always coming across new information and I'll throw it out there. Yeah, my main message, I have a tagline called eat densely, move intensely.
Mm.
So that's kind of my version. So it's like eat less, move more, right? I made a fun of that earlier, right? It's sort of meaningless, stupid things that basically food industry made up to put the blame on you, right? It's not their food is bad. It's that you didn't exercise enough and that you ate too much. And you're like, wait a second, but your food is designed to make us eat too much. That's your whole slogan. Once you pop, you can't stop. You have food scientists like engineering the bliss point, the perfect flavor to make us eat more. So I think eat less, move more is bogus. It's like telling someone to how to be rich is to make more money than you spend. It's completely meaningless and doesn't help anyone. But eat densely and move intensely is kind of the eat densely part is kind of what we've been talking about the whole day, right? Nutrient density. We're talking about proteins, vitamins, minerals. We're talking about animal foods. We're talking about whole foods. All of that is nutrient dense foods. But what's not nutrient dense foods is all the processed foods. That's the empty calories. That's right. This is encapsulating everything we've talked about is the difference between nutrient dense foods and empty calories. That's what eat densely means. And it can mean different diets for different people. And so that's the eat densely part. The move intensely part, that's also gives people more direction. I don't think just move more is valuable advice. I don't think just jogging on a treadmill for 45 minutes is helping anyone. I think that's not even evolutionary consistent, ancestrally consistent. We sprinted, we walked long distances. I think walking's great. I think sprinting is amazing. I think lifting weights is amazing. I think playing sports is amazing. All these things are just sort of more intense. Yeah, you want to tell your muscles to get bigger. Basically, you can't, I just don't think doing steady state, doing a little treadmill thing does anything for anyone, you know? That's a whole nother rabbit hole. And it actually doesn't even burn that many calories. You can eat
Mhm.
like 2 extra bites of food and it would just erase all the calories you just did on the treadmill. So what really matters is people, well, do something that they enjoy so they keep doing it. Like, we
Yeah.
didn't get into all the activity part, but I'm into the whole lifestyle stuff, right? So that includes what you eat, includes exercise, it includes sleep, and it includes, I guess, being outdoors, sun, nature, that type of thing. And I think those are all super important. But we'll just kind of like wrap it up here, just saying focus on those and eat densely, move densely, and you're gonna be pretty good, pretty well off.
Awesome, man. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your knowledge. Really appreciate it. It's good to connect for sure.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
likewise.
I'm gonna have to get you
It's,
back to address the lifestyle one day down the road, perhaps.
oh man,
Yeah,
maybe next year when the film comes out, we can do a follow up.
for
That'd be
sure.
great.
Yeah,
Sounds
definitely.
good. Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for listening. It's the Here for the Truth podcast, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean. Fast forward in evolution to a place where we can share our confusions. Yeah, 450 BC, I'm sharing tea with